Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Seeing as yesterday when I said to you that we were going to have an incredibly difficult conversation, and some of the calls that we took will stay with me, and I know many of you forever, particularly John, who introduced us to a mindset that we hadn't really acknowledged the existence of before. He is a man who is sexually attracted to young children and is as disgusted and repulsed by that as we are. I never really thought about it. If you missed it, it's available on the website. It was one of the most... What's the word I'm looking for? Challenging, thought-provoking. I bumped into my mate Gary this morning, who listens every day as he works as a French polisher in a West End hotel, and he was, first thing he said to me, God, that was something yesterday. Wasn't it? Never thought of it before. If you'd said to me that I could feel anything akin to sympathy for someone possessed of those appetites, I'd have punched you. I'd have laughed in your face. But he's never acted on them. And of course, the massive majority of people who have those impulses don't act on them. Anyway, we'll return to that. So that's why I'm going to do next something that also fills me with a degree of dread, fills me with a degree of fear, actually, I'll be honest with you. It was at the beginning of this year when I was, lucky enough to be interviewed by a bunch of publications about why this radio programme has enjoyed such success over the course of the last 2 years. 12 months we've seen the listening hours go up by 193%. Unfortunately, I'm a firm believer in the laws of gravity, so there's almost certainly bad news around the corner at some point. But it was such a performance at the beginning of the year with the viral clips and the radio audience and just the sort of profile of the programme going through the roof. A bunch of publications came to interview me, and one of them, I can't remember which one, asked me what I thought might happen next. We're talking about the post-fact, the kind of Trumpian success in debasing reality, debasing objectivity. Donald Trump says two completely contradictory things. Whether he knows what he's doing or not, I'm not sure. But it means that we struggle to be confident what truth is. You know what he's done overnight? He has claimed that the head of the Scouts in America called him on the telephone to congratulate him on the best speech that anyone had ever made to the Scouts in the history of their whole organisation. And it turns out that the bloke never rang him. And that's where we are now. That's what post-truth means. It means that you don't know what's true. This is precisely what Vladimir Putin wanted to happen in Europe. He's got three priorities. He wants America and Europe to be divided, because, of course, that Western alliance is what keeps Soviet imperial ambition in check. He wants the America and Europe to be divided. He wants Europe to be divided. And what was the third one? Anyway, he's certainly got 2 out of 3. I wouldn't be surprised if he's got the hat-trick. And when they said what's going to happen next, given that we now believe that you've got significant swathes of America that believe Germany is full of people who are completely furious and unhappy about the German policies. Germany's become a no-go area because of Muslims and brown people and refugees. And then you look at Angela Merkel's approval ratings, and they're the highest they've ever been. You've got a complete post-reality. You've got British people turning up on Fox News describing London in ways that people who live in London just don't recognise. But Fox News will pick it up and run with it, because if you've got a frightened population, you can do whatever you want with them. And the more frightened they are, the less likely they are to recognise truth when they see it. They're going to actually choose to believe the stuff that makes them frightened. You think I sometimes exaggerate? I'll lead you back to the front page of the Daily Mail, which today encourages people to get angry about tighter border controls in the European Union. The contempt in which the public are held now, probably always have been. I've just sort of felt the scales fall from my eyes a bit. And they asked me, what do you think will happen next, given that, you now have almost the sort of fetishization of untruth. You have people who tell lies. You have, people elevated to public positions who are just out and out liars. What's going to happen next? What are you frightened of happening next, James? And I said, after a long pause, looking at the white supremacism that typifies much of Donald Trump's support, and which, if you are as heavily involved on social media as I am, you see a lot of, just genuine, unapologetic racism. And usually that presages, you usually get someone, sadly a couple of them have been and remain on the payroll here, but sadly you'll get people who see that that's happening and they know that it's time to just push it a little bit further, maybe tell another racist lie, and people will get that going around the world. And then you've got these websites that look like reputable news organisations publishing racist lies, and they say, where do you think it's going to go next? And I said, Holocaust denial. And if it is, then we're all finished. It's not quite the word I used. I'll retweet the no, well, only if you want me to. It's a bit cocky, really. It's a very nice interview, very flattering. So, but that's what I said back in January, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Thinking, did you sound like an idiot when you said that? I mean, because always, when you're built of an essentially compassionate and liberal disposition, you always think. In fact, everybody thinks everybody else is like them. So liberals and compassionate people who try to live, for example, a Christian life, they presume that deep down everybody else is like that as well, and they've just been persuaded by demagogues or hate preachers. They've just been sent down that path towards callousness and nastiness. But deep down there, and then people who are quite callous and nasty, they think we're all secretly callous and nasty, and we're all pretending to be compassionate and decent. That's why they use the phrase virtue signalling. I refuse to believe that anybody actually gives a hoot about refugees. If you care about refugees, why don't you have them living in your spare bedroom? As if that's a logical response to the suggestion that the richest countries in the world could be doing more to help people fleeing the poorest. You see what I mean? Everyone thinks that everyone else is like them. And the people who are, I guess, closer to the white supremacist worldview secretly believe that everybody is. Or you become part of the enemy, in which case you tell a white person that he hates white people without realising how stupid that makes you sound. So they said, what do you think will happen next? And I said Holocaust denial, because I can't see what else it will be. You've already got the former Grand Wizard, or whatever they're called, offering his approval and admiration of someone who now works for this radio station, the former head of the Ku Klux Klan. So if we're mainstreaming that sort of shenanigans, if we're mainstreaming that sort of stuff, the most important question you can ask is, what's going to happen next? You know? You had, oh man, I've forgotten his name, Nicholas Winterton, who was responsible for that exodus of Jewish children. He essentially, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it is the single most powerful piece of television that including my own chat show on Anglia Television in the front half of the millennium. It is the single most powerful, but the time I interviewed Darius, that was historic. Nicholas Winterton is sitting in an audience. I think Esther Ransom was the presenter, so it must have been This Is Your Life. He's like the British Schindler. And he had essentially orchestrated the smuggling out of scores of Jewish children from, it wasn't from Germany, I think it was from Czechoslovakia. And he's sitting in the audience. Not much makes me well up, but this does. Imagine being that man. And he was sitting in a television audience. We'll put it up on the clip. Adrian will be listening at the moment. He'll be thinking, oh, I'll dig that clip out for James, because we've done it before.
Nicholas Swinton, then a 29-year-old clerk, visited Prague, Czechoslovakia in late 1938 at the invitation of his friend from the British Embassy. He spent only a couple of months assisting in refugee camps before he realized the danger posed by the imminent Nazi invasion. Winston immediately recognized the danger and made every effort possible to get the children to safety. After the war, Nicholas Winton kept his wartime rescue efforts and achievements secret. His deeds went unrecognized for over half a century and would have stayed so if it wasn't for his late wife, who found a scrapbook in the attic with all the children's photos, a complete list of names, a few letters from parents of the children to Winton, and other documents. Nicholas Winton was first faced with the children he rescued in a television show. He was given no indication of what to expect.
All the letters. But back here is the list of all the children. This is Vera Diamant, now Vera Gissing. We did find her name on his list. Vera Gissing is with us here tonight. Hello, Vera. And I should tell you that you are actually sitting next to Nicholas Winton.
And it was just so wonderful, so terribly, terribly touching.
Is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please?
And he didn't know that all of the people sitting around him were the grown-ups that those children had become. So this man, at immense personal risk and expense, smuggled out Jewish children as the Nazis were banging at the door, and is sitting in a television studio audience when Esther Rantzen addresses him and describes some of what he's done. And then they all stand up, all these people stand up, and they were the adults who would not be here today were it not for him. That man. Incredible. And then only recently Theresa May was at the unveiling of some memorial to him or some ceremony marking his contribution to life and spoke about him utterly ignoring the fact that this country has taken fewer refugees than Nicholas Winton managed to single-handedly save since she became Prime Minister. The entire government that she leads taken fewer people into its bosom, as it were. I think there's 148 councils that have got places that people just aren't being allowed in to fill. And that's kind of what we've become. We've got a political class that will stand up and, salute the memory of Nicholas Winton and his astonishing efforts, while completely ignoring the modern equivalent of those children fleeing Nazi oppression. And that's why the Holocaust denial terrifies me. Because how can you see that? How can you meet these people? How can you stand in Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam and think, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to really work hard to persuade people that this stuff never happened. Or if it did, it was nowhere near as bad as they all say. Anti-Semitism led to the Holocaust, clearly. It also leads, I think, towards Holocaust denial, because if you hold Jewish people in contempt, if you believe that they're somehow materially inferior, then you can not only live with the idea of killing them on an industrial scale, but you can also fairly comfortably absorb the notion that you can deny that ever happened at all because they're somehow less human. But what does it achieve in 2017? I don't think I've got, forgive me for this, I don't think I've got the energy to speak to an actual Holocaust denier. Oh, don't look at me like that, Chris. Producer's cross already. I've already been on for 2.25 hours. I've got a column to write after this. My kids need shoes. I just don't. All right. No, I don't think I can. I just don't think I can. It's odd, actually, because I spoke to someone who is a theoretical paedophile yesterday, and I probably would have said to you at some point, I couldn't imagine doing that. But a Holocaust denier, that's a choice that you've made, and it's so despicable and disgusting. But I don't get it. You know, why are we talking about it today? Crikey, I've done it again, haven't I? Because Sir Peter Bazalgette, who has led the Arts Council, was speaking at the Victoria and Albert Museum yesterday, a display of new designs for a new memorial centre that will allow visitors to the centre's sites next to the Houses of Parliament to see video testimonies from 112 survivors of the Nazi attempt to wipe out Jews in Europe. And while unveiling this new exhibit, he said that the need for a memorial was urgent. And you know, I said it in January, otherwise I'd almost be pinching myself to believe that I'm reading what I'm reading in 2017. It would not be long before the last generation of survivors died, and I have the impression that Holocaust denial may well grow in the next 20 years rather than diminish. So do I. For the umpteenth time in the last 2 years, I really hope I'm wrong. But when somebody else as clever and as insightful as Sir Peter Bazalgette sees what you see, and you're trying to persuade yourself you haven't seen it, you tried to persuade yourself you've been a bit over the top, you're frightened of your own shadow, he stands up at the unveiling of a Holocaust exhibit and says, I have the impression that Holocaust denial may well grow in the next 20 years, rather than diminish. I'm afraid it chills me to my core. And it leaves me with two questions for you. The first is, do you agree? 0345 606 0973. And the second is, why? What does it do? Holocaust denial. What does it give these people? You know, I know what racism is. I know what anti-Semitism is. I know what anti-Muslim bigotry is. I know what anti-Irish bigotry is. I know what prejudice is. But to deny the Holocaust, I genuinely don't get it. And that makes it even more terrifying that it appears to be on the increase. This is one of those hours where I don't necessarily have a codified formal question for you. I've told you what we're talking about. I've shared with you my innermost thoughts and fears, and I just ask you to keep me company until 1 o'clock. The number you need if you want to do that, well, you don't have to ring in to do that, you just need to keep your radio on. It's 0345 606 0973. It's 12:17. And thanks for the heads up. God knows what Simon Marks is doing listening to the programme. LBC's Washington correspondent. Should be sort of waking up, shouldn't he, over in DC? But he's clearly got the wireless on, because he's quite rightly corrected me. Sir Nicholas Winton is the sounded like Harry Seacombe in the Goons then. Ying tong, ying tong, ying tong, ying tong. Sir Nicholas Winton, not Winterton. That's a completely different kettle of fish. Was the man responsible for rescuing children from the Nazi march, Jewish children from the Nazi march on Czechoslovakia. And what intrigues me this morning, as Sir Peter Bazalgette warns that he fears that the internet as an infinite network of communication is going to see a growth in Holocaust denial. I just want to talk about it. I've done a long enough introduction. I want to talk about it. You tell me what you think. Tell me what you want to bring to the party. I don't think I want any Holocaust deniers on the programme, because everyone's got to have a bar over what you've got to. Everyone's got to have a bottom below which they never go, haven't they? I don't know. We'll see. Andy's in Slough. Andy, what would you like to say?
So for me, it screams of the flat Earth movement that's flying about at the minute. People have this fetishization of controversy. So they aspire to say the most controversial thing they possibly can. And no matter how much evidence is presented to them, no matter how much scientific proof, historical proof, whatever you want, primary sources, everything, they'll just deny what's in front of their eyes. So there was a beautiful time-lapse video from the International Space Station put on the internet the other day, and it just showed the Earth from space, and it was beautiful. It was just mind-blowing that as humans we've managed to do this. Yeah. And as a joke, I went on the comment section, and the first thing I was going to do was going to be like, oh, well, it's flat as far as I'm concerned. But sure enough, at the top of the comments was a bloke who, and I mean this, wholeheartedly believed that the Earth was flat and NASA was a conspiracy. And
what's in it for him, Andy? What's in it for him?
Exactly. I have
Stop saying exactly and answer the blinking question, will you?
But there isn't an answer.
But there must be. He must get something out of that. Does it make him feel cleverer than everybody else? I'm in on the truth.
Potentially that. He started saying about fisheye lenses and things like this.
It's always fish. It's always fish.
It's always the fish.
It's always the bloody fish.
I could not believe it. And this man was so serious about it. He wholeheartedly believed that the Earth was flat. And you think to yourself, well, how does a lunar eclipse happen?
How does a boat appear over the horizon? I mean, we don't need to go down that road. Again,
But it's the same thing.
Is it the same thing, though? Because I think you're being a bit charitable, oddly, because you describe sort of berserker worldview that's easily disproved, and then we know we're living in an age where people don't buy facts anymore, so that partly explains it. But all he's getting out of is some weird sense of false superiority. But to deny the Holocaust, to deny the systematic murder of 6 million people, how does that make anyone feel clever?
Well, so to me, the Holocaust has always been something very sort of... I've always taken it quite seriously and quite wholeheartedly into my very core, because I had a Jewish history teacher when I was doing my A-levels, and we went on a trip to Germany, and we went to concentration camps, and just to see the emotion that he was completely detached from it. His family had no connection, but it spoke to him, and it really is something that it gets me angry when people deny it, because there's primary sources, there's people still alive who were there.
So what's in it for them? What's in it for them, for the people that deny it? It's not. No, it's more than. It's got to be more than that, because otherwise I wouldn't have seen it as the next step, and nor would Peter. I keep saying Joseph Bazalgette. That's his granddad who built the sewers under Victorian London. Peter Bazalgette wouldn't be saying it as part of this internet-led assault upon objective truth. It's not just controversialists trying to get noticed. There's something grimmer going on, because it's part of that white supremacist, pro-Donald Trump, the uglier fringes of Brexit, that sort of white nationalist exceptionalism. And I don't know how Holocaust denial plays into that narrative.
But there's always been this horrible sort of accusation of, even back to when the Holocaust was being enacted, of people having this strange idea that the Jews are running the world as a race of people, not even just as a religion, as a race of people, which is ridiculous in itself, because it's something you can become. So there's always been this thing that the banks are run by the Jews, this is run by the Jews, X, Y, Z is run by the Jews, and you think to yourself, I'm sure they've got better things to do. And more to the point, look what's happened to them throughout the years. Why would they persist in this unsuccessful worldview that these people hold?
Sees them persecuted and murdered on a grand scale. Yeah, I mean, I hope, in a way, I hope you're right, and that it is just sort of, if you like, as you say, the fetishization of controversy. But I think it's worse. I think there's something really ugly behind it, and I can't quite pin down what it is. Is it if you deny the Holocaust, you make it easier for another one to happen?
So the dehumanization of people is what's required for it, isn't it? Yeah. And to take away, for somebody to stop being somebody and becoming it is criteria.
Yeah, like they're doing with Muslims as well now, when you talk about Muslim bans.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's the same people. That's why I thought Holocaust denial would be next, because if you are othering an entire ethnicity or an entire religion or an entire race, and Islam and Judaism have that in common, actually, that neither a race nor a religion nor both, because we talk about Muslim countries and you can't renounce your Islamic nature to the satisfaction of someone like Donald Trump. If you can just deny the Holocaust, you can also increase the likelihood of another one happening, rounding people up, banning them from your country.
Doesn't it come down to, like, success as well? So genuinely people being hardworking and successful, and it just being envy. People genuinely finding something and some reason to hate somebody who's more successful than them.
Or less successful than them, but used by people more successful as a distraction tactic. The old classic, you know. If you were a billionaire owner of a newspaper, who would you want people who are a bit skint to be getting cross with? Billionaire owners of tax-avoiding billionaire owners of newspapers, or Polish plasterers, or indeed Muslims? Michael is in Boreham Wood. Andy, thank you for holding my hand as well, because it's a tough topic, this. Michael's in Boreham Wood. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hi, good afternoon to you. I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I'm blessed. I've got 3 children, 3 boys, 12, 9, and 5 years old. Yeah. And I make a point of, wherever possible, introducing them to Holocaust survivors. And my reasoning for this is very, very simple. Unfortunately, time's running out. These are men and women that are approaching the twilight years of their lives.
Yes.
And I want my 3 boys to understand that these are real people. It's not a page in history.
No.
It's not something that happened to their people. It's something that happened to people that they know. And so much so that whenever I meet a Holocaust survivor, I always introduce them to my kids wherever possible. And I always ask them to give my kids a blessing. Because anyone that's been through that level of horror and come out the other side with any level of faith is perfectly positioned to bless another human being.
I couldn't agree with you more. I really couldn't. And oddly, the reason we're having this conversation is linked to what you just described. It is the knowledge, the inevitability of all within our lifetimes, there not being any Holocaust survivors left. So these video testimonies from 112 survivors of the Nazi attempt to wipe out Jews in Europe are being installed in an exhibit next to Westminster. What about the suggestion that Holocaust denial is on the rise? Has that beeped on your radar at all?
Well, unfortunately, there always seems to be a link between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Whenever anything happens in the Middle East, for whatever reason, we see anti-Semitism increasing, and I think as a general thing, it's certainly with the right increasing.
Does anti-Semitism play into Holocaust denial? I mean, because I know I said it myself, but it's odd, isn't it? Anti-Semitism both causes a Holocaust and explains Holocaust denial.
Oh, absolutely does. But it's like I was always told by my late mother. Work hard because no one's going to give you anything.
Yeah.
If you work hard, you become moderately successful, and people look at you and go, "Well, look what he did. He's got it must because he's Jewish." No, it's not, because I've got a great education, worked my socks off, and actually made everything I've got.
I don't encounter the kind of anti-Semitism that you describe, obviously, because I'm not Jewish. I recognise the conflation of Israel with the Jewish people, but I probably have a slightly different perspective of it on you. I still don't get the. Here's the thing. What's in it for a Holocaust denier, Michael? I know that sounds like a slightly odd question, but I think it cuts to the heart of my personal problem. What's in it for them? What do they get out of it?
I think for them it's a way of reaching out and touching the soul of somebody who's obviously Jewish in front of them, because the single best way to get to your average Jew is by denying the Holocaust, because it's such a powerful part of our personal
gosh.
That by doing that, they're almost undermining everything we are and everything we believe in, because they know it's a raw nerve. It doesn't matter.
So it is just another. It's the ultimate manifestation of. Well, no, it's the penultimate manifestation of anti-Semitism. The ultimate manifestation is rounding you up and killing you. The penultimate manifestation is denying that ever happened.
Absolutely, and that way they know they are going to get a reaction, and it doesn't matter how orthodox or reform or
of course not.
Liberal, it is something that every single Jew, no matter what shade, stripe, orientation, will absolutely feel down to their very soul.
But why then is it part of the arsenal employed by people who are white supremacists, white nationalists, anti-Muslim bigots? Why is it part of their game plan?
Because a bigot is a bigot. They will take the view that anyone who's not identical to them is different, and they will play on the difference. They'll never see the similarities between human beings. They'll never understand that him standing next to me on the tube is breathing the same air that I'm breathing in. They will rather take the fact that I'm wearing a skull cap as some sign of an absolute radical difference.
A fundamental difference. A fundamental difference. And if you can establish that, and I suppose the less you have to be proud of in your life, in terms of achievements or gifts or inheritances or any of the things that might enable one to stand up a little bit straighter, if you haven't got any of that, when someone tells you that your fundamentals, if you will, your birthright renders you better than Michael, you're more likely to believe them. The more inadequate you are, the more susceptible you will be to that kind of rhetoric, I think, at least. Thank you, Michael. It's 12:31. If it's Holocaust in our next, then we're all flibberty-gibbeted. It's a phrase I uttered in January when asked what I thought might happen next in this post-fact, increasingly racist public arena. And Sir Peter Bazalgette, former head of the Arts Council, former head of the Endemol in Britain, a big television executive. I think he ran ITV for a while, or Channel 4. He has said, "I have the impression that Holocaust denial may well grow in the next 20 years rather than diminish. The internet is an infinite network of communication. Most television and newspaper reports are mediated. The internet is completely different. It's entirely demotic. If you want to search for Holocaust denial, you'll be amazed what comes up. Our job is to challenge that. And he's right. I mean, some people have forwarded me some of the stuff that's come up from Holocaust deniers listening to this programme. And you read into their threads and it's always the same. They start talking about crimes committed by brown people in continental Europe. They'll start talking about Donald Trump. And oddly, because this is really unfair, they toe a very similar line on Brexit as well. And that bit I don't get, that last bit, except for the kind of exceptionalism, the nationalism, the white supremacism that seems to have become permitted on both sides of the Atlantic in a way that for most of my lifetime, because of political correctness, it simply wasn't permitted. You know, the idea that a former Grand Wizard or whatever they're called of the Ku Klux Klan could come out and express his admiration for a British politician, and that British politician then gets hired by a British radio station. If I had said that to you 10 years ago, yeah, you'd have laughed him out. You'd say, "Oh, get over yourself, mate. This is Great Britain. We don't do that." If someone behaves in public in a way that wins the admiration of a former leader of the Ku Klux Klan, that person is going to be pushed out of British public life, not welcomed into it by the billionaire owners of various newspapers. Strange. And they said, "What do you think will happen next?" And I said, "Holocaust denial." And I think I was right. And I hate it. And I don't get it. And it scares the shenanigans out of me. Scott's in Leeds. Scott, what's going on?
Hey James, how you doing?
I'm grand. I hate this conversation, mate, to be honest with you, but I think we have to have it.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting conversation. I was just calling in to say that I think that Holocaust denial is more of a historical justification for anti-Semitism. So they're just trying to legitimize their views. And it's...
How does that work?
How does it work?
Yeah, how does it legitimise anti-Semitism? In a way, it's the ultimate manifestation of anti-Semitism.
Well, if you look into like anti-Semitic stereotypes,
yes,
which you guys have hit on before just a couple of minutes ago.
Sure.
They can look into how Holocaust denial is just...
Really? I mean, the notion that Jewish people run the world, or the blood libels and the ludicrous sort of historical attempts to scapegoat them for all sorts of economic crises. It's not confined to Jewish people. Oh, what's going on there? Oh, we'll come back, I think, to Scott. James is in Maidstone. James, what would you like to say?
Oh, good afternoon, James. First time I called.
You're very welcome.
What it is that I think that Holocaust denial it's come up with Nazis, Hitler worshippers who love Hitler.
Yeah.
But the problem that they've got is if they buy it all and accept the Holocaust happens, then what they are saying is that they want to be mass murderers, which even for them is not actually acceptable. So what they do is they deny that it happens in order that they can have the views that they have. So that's, I think, why they want to be Nazis, and they don't want to believe it's true because they can't believe what they believe otherwise. And that, I think, is the emotional impulse behind it.
Well, hang on. What do they like about Hitler then? If the Holocaust is, if you will, a bridge too far for them, I would have thought anyone who admired Hitler, one of the first things on their list of things they liked about him must have been the murder of minorities.
Well, because...
And what else is there about Hitler? I mean, I'm a relatively well-educated guy, but apart from sort of Kristallnacht and some of the early Mein Kampf ponderings, all I could really associate with him with is the Second World War and the Holocaust. What is there to admire apart from that?
Well, I suppose they like the idea of rolling a tank with a generous rank as the Blitzkrieg raised in a nice uniform and stomping over half of it.
That doesn't work, does it? That doesn't quite wash. It has to be more substantive than that. I don't think, because I like the idea, I like the way your brain has led you, the idea that they deny the Holocaust because it allows them to continue their admiration of Hitler. But if you're removing the Holocaust from Hitler, what are you left with?
Well, it wasn't only Jews he hated, was it?
Roma people, homosexuals, trades unionists, socialists, Catholics. Exactly. I mean, they were all there.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what's left, I suppose, in answer to your question. Now it is very much the prototype for this post-truth world, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. I want to be wrong, but I think it might be.
Yeah, that's what first. That's where the thought pattern first emerged.
So here you go. Then try this on for size. So what you have is a desire to other a population. In this case, in the way Britain and America are at the moment, it's Muslims. And the desire is to portray them all as terrorists or paedophiles or members of grooming gangs, completely ignoring sort of annoying little historical facts like Richard II married a 6-year-old girl. It doesn't mean that every member of the royal family since has been some sort of paedophile apologist. It just means that the world was different then. They want to do that. They want to do the most sort of textbook style of othering, treat people differently, restrict their laws according to their ethnicity or background. For example, you can't come into this country if you were born into a certain background. For example, you can't you can't access this service if you were born somewhere else. That kind of politics. And what they can't do is admit that that leads to the Holocaust. So if you're buying into the idea of othering Muslims or banning Irish people from the NHS or having some sort of colour bar or saying, why should black people be allowed into the VIP section of my nightclub? If you're born of that, if you subscribe to that set, then you have to deny the Holocaust, because everybody else knows that once you open the door to that kind of worldview, that's where it ends.
Exactly, yes. Now,
I love the way you're claiming that's what you rang in to say.
Well, it's not so terrible. Well, I was not quite that. You put it better than me. That's why you're a DJ.
Yeah, DJ.
I'm not, right?
Right, MC.
Now, I will mildly disagree with you on one point, which is that I don't think that it's so much Jewish people that are going to be the target. I think it's much more likely to be Muslims.
Yeah, this time round it is.
And a lot of far-right groups, just to point something out, are all fanatical supporters of Israel.
Of course.
Precisely because they are what they think they do to the Muslims. So I'm not sure it's necessarily going to be Holocaust denial, because, you know, Israel is the enemy of Muslims, isn't it? So, but it will be something else, and it will be against probably Muslims, I would think.
That's the thing, and anybody who says we need to ban them from our country, we need to stop them, we need to get rid of you know that once you allow that worldview to catch on, everybody who understands history will say, but it never ends. You never reach a point where, you know, violent racists say, right, we've hurt enough foreigners now. We're all going to go home and relax. Everything's great. Look, life is brilliant. We've voted for this and we've done it and we've rounded them up. We've had a parasmos. We've had a Holocaust. We've had a final reckoning. We've tried a final solution. And we can all relax now because everything's fine. It never, ever happens. They always move on to the next level and then the next level and then the next level and the next level is a Holocaust.
And it never makes their lives better either.
Oh, we know that. We know that.
So, of course, they never stop. So that's my thoughts on it.
Well, I think between the two of us, we've made a bit of progress there, James. It must be something to do with the Christian name.
Yeah, I can only concur on that one.
The power of the Jameses. It's 12:44. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There's a lovely statue, if you're anywhere near Maidenhead, of Sir Nicholas Winton. I think it's where he lived. Ian's just sent me a photograph of it. You know, if you had to pick a hero, there's that programme on called Great Lives, which did Ellen Wilkinson yesterday, and I've often thought, who would I like to know more about? And I don't think about Nicholas Winton very often. I only think about him when Holocaust issues are front and centre, as we've elected to put them today. But I mean, you look back and he was so modest, you know, his own family didn't know what he'd done. It was one of those lives. I think did they find something in the attic, his grandchildren or his children, and they started digging into the story and the truth started to emerge? And then we send the Prime Minister to unveil a memorial to him, who has taken fewer refugees during her period of power in Number 10 into the entire country than that individual man smuggled out of the Nazi clutches in Czechoslovakia. And that's why Holocaust denial happens, isn't it? Because the people who are on the foothills of that level of hatred don't want to admit where the peak is, because they're climbing. It's 12:45. Trying to understand is perhaps an inappropriate word, but we're talking about Holocaust denial, the fears expressed by Sir Peter Bazalgette as he unveiled a new exhibit displaying video testimonies from 112 survivors of the Holocaust, and he warned that with the internet somehow allowing the end of objective truth, somehow facilitating a post-fact universe, he fears it's on the rise, and so do I. And I, just like him, we could both be wrong, but I absolutely see it as part of this process of exceptionalism and nationalism that has gathered pace in the last couple of years on both sides of the Atlantic. Andy's in Streatham. Andy, what made you ring in?
Hi, James. It was something you said a little while ago. You were wondering why these white supremacists have a thing against Jews.
Well, no, specifically why they deny the Holocaust.
Well,
I think, although you can answer the question that you rang in to answer as well, I'd be interested to hear it.
It's kind of the same thing, because But I've met...
No, it isn't. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Because for me, if I was a full-on anti-Semite, I'd celebrate the Holocaust, wouldn't I? Rather than deny it.
Would you? I don't know. I mean, I think they do. I think they do celebrate. They celebrate the racial segregation and the racial laws and the idea of separating the Jews and blah blah blah, and even sending them to their own homeland and all of that.
Yes.
But they've got a. I met this guy called Don Black, who was the ex-Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
Indeed, he was.
He was, yes. We interviewed him for a documentary.
Just to be clear, it wasn't him that endorsed the liar Farage. That was David Duke, who was a Grand Wizard a little bit later and said he thought that Farage would make an excellent Prime Minister in Britain. I don't want us to point out the wrong Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard endorsing a radio presenter.
They're great friends.
Yeah.
And he said that the reason that they had a problem with Jews was, and I'm Jewish, and he knew I was Jewish, sure. He said that that Jews were instrumental in the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the gay liberation movement. Basically, everything he thought had destroyed America as he knew it, or as he wanted it.
Everything that had undermined the most total manifestation of white privilege. White men should be running the world, and because of the flipping Jews, now we've got women and black people and gays, and they're all being treated equally.
Yeah. Absolutely, and also in researching before meeting him, I read something on I think possibly on Stormfront or on one of those websites where he runs Stormfront, that they thought black people were basically savages, stupid savages was how they saw them, so they could be controlled with force.
And that's a post-slavery perspective, isn't it? It has to be.
Jews, on the other hand, they reckoned they had some statistics to say that Jews had a higher IQ on average than other races, as they called them, and they saw them as evil geniuses. So they were more worried about Jews than they were about anybody.
And what would the rationale be? Why would these evil geniuses be dedicating their efforts to promoting the rights of these savages? What I mean, did you go that far into the conversation? I presume you had to have a good wash afterwards.
Actually, no, this little bit was off camera.
Sure.
These things. But why would they be doing it?
Yeah. What's in it for the Jews? Why are they helping the blacks? Would be the question I'd ask if I was sort of being a little bit simplistic.
I would imagine his response would be to have the exact effect that they had, which was to undermine, the
white supremacist in order to make money. Presumably they'd subscribe to that cliche, would they, or something like that?
To take over the world, I would imagine.
To take over the world, yes.
Usual thing.
And then why the denial? Have you got? I know that's not what you rang in to tell me. That's absolutely fascinating what you say, because it ties in with the Trump thing completely, doesn't it? But the Holocaust denial, how does that play into the worldview?
Because they see that they think that Jews have used the Holocaust in order to promote
to validate their cause, as it were, to say, no, look, the reason why we fight these corners is because if you don't fight these corners, stuff like this happens, and the only way you can really argue with that is by saying, no, that stuff never happened at all.
Actually, no, that wasn't what I was saying, but that's pretty spot on, I reckon.
Thank you.
That's quite good. But also that they see, they think it's a kind of propaganda machine for Jews to take over the world or whatever they're trying to do.
And if you tally that with the civil rights thing, you're beginning to get a clearer picture of what the hell is going on, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you see the Trumpian movement to kind of, denigrate women, denigrate Muslims, denigrate people of colour, just to sort of push that white man who's baffled and confused about why he's no longer in charge. That's Donald Trump's core support, and boom, it transmogrifies into white supremacism, and white supremacism quickly transmogrifies into Holocaust denial at the most lunatic fringes.
Yeah. And he lived in Palm Beach, Florida, which has a higher Jewish population than New York.
And his own son, I believe, abandoned the cause despite being groomed to take over at the head of the Ku Klux Klan after becoming very good friends with an Orthodox Jew when at college.
Absolutely. In fact, we didn't meet the son, and this was about 13 years ago, and we afterwards were talking about how sad it was, and would this guy ever be able to break out of it, this little kid?
Oh,
he did.
And he did. Well, there's a happy ending of sorts, although I suppose he might have broken out of it as America has fallen prey to it on an electoral scale. Andy, what an amazing call. Were you making a film out there or something like that, or do you not want to disclose it?
We did a documentary. It was 13 years ago. We did a documentary for Channel 4 called. It was about a website called JewWatch.com, which had a list of prominent Jews, and we decided we'd make a documentary to try and get on the list. We knew we'd pay if we got on the list, and so we went around and kind of met lots of Jews.
Did it work?
Did it work? He said he would put in a good word for us. But I don't think he ever did. He hosted the site, but he didn't run it, apparently.
And finally, this notion that is born of my fears and Sir Peter Bazalgette's comments last night that Holocaust denial is on the rise. Have you encountered that lately yourself?
Well, not in person particularly, but just generally, the background noise on the internet and what have you. Yeah, I mean, post-truth.
It has to be. It has to happen. And now we know a little bit more about why. Thank you so much. I love these sort of conversations where we're all sort of groping around in the dark together and occasionally we find a light switch. Jonathan is in Huntington. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hi. It's such an important topic you're covering this morning.
It won't be the last time. It won't be the last time.
I run educational programs at Auschwitz. It's one of the things I do as a Holocaust educator.
Gosh.
And when we're looking at what genocide is, and the word genocide was coined as a response to the Holocaust, where we're trying to grapple and understand what took place. Part of the crime of genocide is denial. Professor Greg Stanton, who developed the idea of genocide, divides it into kind of 8. There are 8 stages of genocide, and the last one is denial. Because if you, like any criminal, if you deny it, if you cover it up, you can do it again.
Yes.
One of the problems we've got is with the term, because you can't. There's more written documentation to support the Holocaust than any other event in history, apparently.
Good grief, really?
So you can't actually deny it took place. But if you start downgrading the figures, if you start saying, well, it was only a couple of 100,000 Jews, it wasn't 6 million, then you start to water down the whole concept.
So it's Holocaust dilution, not Holocaust denial.
Yeah, or revisionism.
Revisionism.
The United Nations is set up to fight genocide. And it was one of the reasons the UN was set up. And if genocide is happening, they have to intervene. We saw exactly the same thing with Rwanda.
Yes.
I'm doing a lot of work with Rwanda at the moment, where, again, it's a very political, very sensitive topic. There's loads of denial at the moment with the Rwandan genocide.
Is there really?
Especially at the moment with the presidential elections coming up in Rwanda. So it's a hugely emotive and very politically sensitive topic.
Well, you can say that again. What do you think, and briefly, because we're going to run out of time, it's a slightly embarrassingly simplistic question, but it's the one I keep wanting to ask. What do you think's in it for them? The motivation for genocide is easier to understand, perhaps, than the motivation for denial. What's in it for them, or dilution, or revisionism?
It's a general pushing of the hatred. I mean, anti-Semitism is so deep in European culture. The first massacre of Jews, and I don't know whether people are aware of this, the first massacre of Jews in Europe was in York in the 12th century. So it's happened in this country. It's very, very deeply ingrained in our Christian European culture.
But why does Holocaust denial help Holocaust deniers? I mean, you're absolutely right about the 12th century pogrom, but it's also fair to observe that after the Great Fire of London, the mob tried to blame it on Dutch immigrants. So there's always an othering involved, and Jews are often at the forefront of it. But why does denial or revisionism help the white supremacist cause?
Because I think the Holocaust as an event, which it's an unprecedented event in history on such a scale, I think so horrified people, so horrified the world, that gave a tremendous outpouring of support for the Jewish people, and saying this hatred is so wrong because we can see where it leads. Well, if you then deny the destination of hatred and say, well, actually, it wasn't that big, it never happened really like that.
That's it, isn't it? Yeah.
The hatred is not so important.
Oh, mate, what an hour. Thank you so much. I genuinely, I used to feel like this at university about once a year. I get it now, in a way that I didn't get it before. These terrible, terrible people who are getting so much time and attention and money, they're all at the same game. They're all about trying to deny the fact that the path that they've set us upon leads to Holocaust. Oh, God.